Welcome to 805 Focus. I'm Dr. Cinder Sinclair with Nonprofit Connect, and we will be bringing you the latest on your favorite nonprofits. So get ready to be inspired. Our special guest today is Jonathan Malindine, and Jonathan is with the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Cinder. Nice to be here.
I'm so glad you're here because I know you have a fascinating story to tell, and I might know a little teeny bit of what you're going to talk about. So I'm really excited to hear about it. So I know you specialize in the anthropology part at the museum. So tell us all about that.
Well, the anthropology department fits into our broader mission, the mission of the museum to connect people with nature, in that humans have always been part of the landscape. And we had a very rich cultural history in this zone pre-contact. And so we've been working with Chumash groups for decades to help tell their story.
So you've been working with them for a long time.
Yeah, all the local groups, the Barbareño, the Ventureño, the Northern Chumash up in San Luis. The Chumash range from about Malibu to San Luis.
From Malibu to San Luis. And are there various, I don't know, is the right word, tribes or groups or?
Yeah, they're all part of a larger group, but we have the Santa Ynez Mission Indians over the mountain, and then the Barbareño were the group that lived in this particular region, centered around the Goleta Slough.
Okay. Yeah. And so I heard you use the word repatriation. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I'm the NAGPRA officer, and that stands for the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. It's a federal law.
Native American Graves and Repatriation Act.
Yes.
Whoa.
And that's a federal law that was established in 1990, and it basically gives Indian tribes the same protections over their graves that our society has enjoyed forever, and that every culture around the world has protections for the sacred nature of their ancestors and their graves. And for many years, those protections weren't applied to the Indian tribes.
Really? I don't think I even knew that.
Yeah. So the federal law and now state law requires institutions like ours, universities and museums, to work with the tribes to identify what objects in our collection are eligible for repatriation, which means return. And mostly we're talking about ancestors. You know, some call them human remains, but we are more respectful and like to call them ancestors, and the belongings that were buried with them. And so we've been repatriating for the last couple of years vast amounts of ancestors and their belongings to the Chumash.
Gosh. Now, how long have you been doing the repatriation for? Why do I have a hard time with that word?
I started there 2 years ago, and just prior to my arrival in 2022, we had repatriated about 99% of all the ancestors that were previously housed at our museum to the Santa Ynez Band of Chumash Indians.
Wow, that's a lot. So 99%. So I don't know, do you have a way of estimating like how many things that was, or how many items?
Yeah, so we repatriated about probably close to 2,000 ancestors and tens of thousands of their belongings. In the past, archaeologists around here have targeted cemeteries, and not just around here, around the country. They excavated cemeteries, and a lot of sensibilities have changed these days, and so it's not done so much. But prior to a couple of years ago, well, we received our first repatriation request in 2021. But prior to that, the tribes knew that they were housed at our museum. They were very carefully protected and kept safe and sound. But now, with new federal regulations, there's a nationwide push to to repatriate all of these to the tribes, and that's happening here at our museum and at museums all over the country. We're currently in the middle of a big wave of repatriations. It's sweeping the nation.
So do you think that most museums they're eager to help with that? Or was there initially some, wait a minute, those things are ours for our museum?
Yeah.
What's the sort of mindset?
I would say that it's something of a generational shift. I would also say that, as I mentioned, we received the claim for repatriation in 2021. Before that, the tribes were all right with it. And but I would also say that there's this new law went into effect recently, new federal regulations that apply to that NAGPRA law that put deadlines and deadlines for compliance on institutions like ours. And the reason, unfortunately, the reason that was instituted is that museums and universities across the country, some have been hesitant or foot dragging or trying to find loopholes to allow them to keep these ancestors and their belongings. Yeah. So I would say the sentiment is changing around the country, and these new laws have these deadlines, so they're requiring, at the risk of non-compliance and penalties, they're requiring universities and museums all over the country to finally get it done. Does that make sense?
Okay, it does make sense. So you say you have been with the museum for 2 years. Did you come on board for that very act, for that reason?
I would say that, yeah, with the introduction of the Cal NAGPRA law, it's a state version, and with the new regulations that changed just recently, that did put a lot of extra emphasis on completing all repatriations over the next couple of years.
Gotcha.
So that is why they probably hired this position.
So, but you've been working in anthropology for years and years.
Yes. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I come from Alaska. That's where I was living with the Tlingit and Haida tribes, the totem pole carving Northwest Coast tribes, and fell in love with their culture. It's still extremely active. And then got into anthropology somewhere around 2005, starting at City College, and then to UCSB, and then into the PhD program where I spent 10 years at UCSB and just went to work at the museum after that.
Gosh, so you're an anthropologist through and through.
Yeah. I would say also there's another interesting category of objects that are eligible for repatriation under that federal law, NAGPRA, and it's the sacred objects. And there are very few of these in collections, but they're extremely interesting. These are objects that were used in ceremony by Native tribes that are still needed today to perform those same ceremonies.
Wow.
And so I was mentioning, talking to you before the show about a trip I just took to repatriate 5 or 6 sacred objects to Southwest tribes. We also brought some ancestors for reburial up in Utah, and it was beautiful to have that finally completed and the ancestors at rest back where they were originally from in Utah after all these years.
Gosh, I bet that's so important to the tribes.
Yeah, especially ancestors. It's hugely important to the tribes. They want to see them at rest. They want to see them back where they belong and with their people. Yeah.
So up until this law was passed, would you say that most of the tribe members felt like, oh, that's good, our stuff that we value so much is in the Natural History Museum, and we know they're taking good care of it, so we're not going to worry about it? Yeah. Is that how they saw it?
Yeah, and there's a lot of good relationships that exist between museums and tribes, and it is, as you say, we can provide a place where they're protected, secure, free from pests, and temperature control, environmental control. And the tribes generally are interested in that because they want access to the that cultural heritage.
Yeah.
Right? They could at any time come visit those objects, learn about them, have classes, maybe reinvigorate how to make things that their ancestors made. Yeah. So there's a lot of tribes that still, to this day, would like that to continue. And that's up to them. So we could repatriate those objects in that we transfer the ownership to them. And they could still request that we curate them.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask you if they ever say, no, we don't. We want you to keep.
Yeah, sure. That happens a lot. And we would love to continue to protect that cultural heritage on behalf of the local tribes. And we have a very live, collaborative relationship with the local Chumash groups. There's basket weaving classes every month. There's annual Chumash culture events. We meet with them a lot, and in the future, all of our exhibits about Chumash culture will be created in collaboration with the tribes themselves.
What a wonderful collaboration that is.
Yeah, it's only natural that to me that in the future, all museum exhibits that are talking about Native Americans should be consulting and collaborating with those tribes themselves to let them help tell their story. We should be helping them tell their stories, in other words.
Yeah. So do you do any, I don't know, like education? Like, let's just say you're giving some precious things back to the tribe, and you're afraid, or they're afraid that, gosh, what if we don't take care of it right? I don't want it to disintegrate or something like that. Do you do any education about here's how you take care of it?
It's usually the opposite. It's usually the tribes that are sharing their knowledge about those objects. They almost universally know a lot more about their own culture than we do.
Yeah.
And I rarely run into those situations. In fact, on this last repatriation trip, we returned a sacred drum. It's a ceramic kiva drum from the Pueblo of Zuni it could be as old as 1850, that's used in their medicine society ceremonies. And it was intact, and we just drove it out there a couple weeks ago, and they're going to put it to use in their current ceremonies. And so they're far from being afraid of, we're going to mess this up. No, they're very, very happy to have it back. Another example is we also repatriated a medicine bundle from the Navajo tribe, to the Navajo Nation. So it's a collection of the tools and implements that a shaman would use for healing and ceremony. And this collection of shamanic tools is also very old. The Navajo Nation is going to put them back to use in their community. I'm sure they'll have some ceremony to cleanse it of whatever it picked up in the meantime, but they're going to hand those out to their current religious leaders, and they'll be back in action.
Wow.
The same thing is happening with the Hopi. We repatriated a Kachina mask. These are objects that fall under NAGPRA in that they're the rare sacred and ceremonial ones. Also, there's a category called cultural patrimony. And objects like that of cultural patrimony, they can't be owned by an individual. They're owned by the tribe or by a clan or by the whole Indian community. And so no one person in the tribe has the right to sell it or the right to alienate it from the group. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, gotcha.
So these are very rare objects, but a Kachina mask is one of them. And so we happen to have two of them in our collections. We returned one to the Pueblo of Jemez and one to the Hopi tribe of Arizona. And the representative, the tribal historic preservation officer at Hopi, told me they don't actually have that big of a space to hold these objects that are being repatriated. So he's going to put that back into the community as soon as possible. In other words, he's going to give that mask to someone in their community who will take care of it, refurbish it, use it in current ceremony live. So I think that's wonderful when an object that's been hidden in a cabinet for decades, 50,
Yeah.
70 years, has a new life back where it came from.
So you're like a hero coming in there.
We spread a lot of goodwill. The Santa Barbara
I
Museum of Natural
bet.
History spread a lot of goodwill on that trip last week.
So, okay, so tell us how that went. So, what'd you do? A pickup or a van or how?
The museum van.
Okay,
Yeah.
the van. And how many people were in the van with you?
Me and my daughter,
You and your
12-year-old,
daughter.
12-year-old Dahlia.
Oh my gosh. A budding anthropologist, perhaps.
It was a great
So
trip.
there you
yeah.
go. And was the van like full of all kinds of stuff,
Yep.
carefully packed?
Yeah,
and-
carefully packed crates, just as you'd imagine an anthropology expedition might look like. And we drove 2,400 miles all the way through 5 or 6 states. It was wonderful. As I said, we repatriated some ancestors that were reburied in Utah within Bears Ears National Monument.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd just been working for like 2 years with a lot of the ancestral Puebloan tribes that are now in New Mexico and Arizona, and the Bureau of Land Management in Utah to establish a burial plot for ancestors like these that were removed from Utah. And so the representatives from 4 tribes met us there, and we made it happen. It was beautiful.
So they knew you were coming.
We've been working together for 2 years to make all these arrangements. Yeah.
So, all right. So, were there just these 4 people there, or to greet you, or was there a whole bunch of people? Or
We all met up in Utah. There was 5 representatives from the Bureau of Land Management, which administers the National Monument. There were 4 elders of Acoma from New Mexico that were going to actually do the reburial ceremony, and then representatives from Zuni, from the Navajo Nation, were there to provide support, emotional support, to honor the reburial process. And Hopi, so there's Hopi, the Navajo Nation, and Zuni and Acoma.
So was there a big facility that everybody hauled all these things inside, or was it outside, or how did they?
It's a private, secret burial location, because the most important thing is when we finally do all this work and get these ancestors returned and they're finally reburied, the tribes are most interested in the fact that these ancestors not be disturbed again.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wow. Yeah.
they try to pick burial locations that are off the beaten path, that won't be subject to development in the future, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of these ancestors came from development projects,
Yeah.
it happens around here. Yeah, maybe your audience knows or doesn't know, but there were Chumash villages all over the place in our region. And so people find sensitive artifacts and even remains of ancestors through erosion, coming out of the beach, for example, or the creek beds. They also, anytime someone starts digging around here, whether it's to build a new development or maybe your garden or a pool or something like that, you're frequently finding artifacts like this that may be from a cemetery.
So what should they do? Give you a call?
A lot of people do, and we're working out ways to connect people who find such things with the proper tribe, and so they can directly transfer those objects.
Oh, instead of going through you.
Right, and sometimes the tribes will ask us to hold on to them for a while until a burial is,
Oh,
ready.
Gotcha.
And we're happy to do that too. Yeah, as often as we can say yes to tribal requests, we want to do it.
Jonathan, this is fascinating work. No wonder you're so passionate about it. Gosh, I really appreciate
Yeah, I'm
you.
lucky. It's a very rewarding job, and I'm lucky to be an ally, and I'm lucky that our community is supporting these repatriations, and that our board is supporting it. Our president is leading that push.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of good feelings behind doing the right thing after a long time of
maybe inadvertently doing the wrong thing.
Maybe.
Well, gosh, I'd say our community and the museum are lucky to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you for sharing your wonderful story with us.
It's my
We
pleasure.
appreciate all your good work.
My pleasure. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. And thanks for joining us on 805 Focus, and we'll see you next time.